Друзі, тут зробимо тут коло і все. Починаємо. Час починати.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації! Україна! 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 Героям України тричі!
Слава!
Thank you very much, my friends, for coming here today, as usual. You know our rallies happen every single Wednesday at 6 o'clock, every Friday at 6 o'clock, and every Sunday at 3 o'clock. So don't be shy, my friends. Come to our rallies. We're always happy to see you. And let's not forget that this Sunday in particular, we will have a special event after our usual rally. It will be a human chain. We will move from here after our event here is done, and we will move away to London Bridge, I believe. Near Big Ben, I believe over here. Not London Bridge. Yeah, Westminster Bridge. Thank you. Why am I calling it London Bridge? There's so many bridges in London, and yet only one of them is known as London Bridge. It's interesting. But my friends, we'll start as we always do with the Ukrainian anthem. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Героям України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Once again, my friends, this day there's a lot of good news. One of them is actually very interesting. It's not as much as good news as it is funny news. Putin has passed a legislation that enables him to annex any region in the world that used to belong to the Soviet Union or to the Russian Empire. So, why is this good news, you might ask? Well, obviously Russia does not have the strength to move onward to other countries before it deals with Ukraine. That is why it's so important for us to support Ukraine and make sure that Ukraine wins, so that Russia cannot move any further and spread this war to other countries and do what they've done to the Ukrainian people, attack them and try to genocide them. But my friends, why is this news good? Well, because Russia can't attack other countries, and at the same time, it shows that Putin does indeed have ambitions to continue his conquest, to continue his genocide, even outside of Ukraine. No region in Europe is truly safe. One of these days, Putin might have the bright idea to say that every left-leaning government in all of Europe belongs to Russia. Oh, because the Soviet Union used to be this left-leaning country. But in reality, my friends, the Soviet Union was a genocidal country. It started World War II on the same side as Nazi Germany. It has signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Treaty with the Germans, with the Nazis, to divide Poland in half. Half would go to the Soviets, half would go to the Nazis. And that's what they did. And during that time, every single socialist and communist party in the West was fully supporting isolationism and non-interventionism. in World War II, my friends. Even after Kristallnacht, even after all the genocides the Germans had already started, that the Nazis had begun. But my friends, Germany has changed. The German people have changed. And the Russian people will also have to change. Because this world cannot move forward with genocidal tendencies like those of the terrorist Russian regime. Russia is a terrorist state.
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 Stop Russia, stop the war.
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 Help Ukraine protect peace.
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 We can see a lot of very funny legislations being passed lately, my friends. We have the legislation of Lukashenko about him being immune from any prosecution after inevitably going out of his presidential office, quote unquote. Because of course we all know that Lukashenko is no president. Lukashenko is a dictator. Lukashenko is an authoritarian leader masquerading as a democracy, but with a very thin layer of actual lies. Lukashenko doesn't even try to cover it up these days, honestly. And Putin, the happy grandpa, as Prigozhin used to call him, now he's completely off his meds. Now he thinks that he can threaten every single country that used to be under the Russian Empire and under the Soviet Union. And for all of you, my American friends who will listen to this, do not forget that before Alaska was American, it used to be part of the Russian Empire. So think about that for a second. For all the Americans who think that Russia is on the other side of the world, it will never do anything to them, think about this piece of legislation. Putin decided that every single part of the world that used to be under the Soviet Union and under the Russian Empire should return to Russia, and he has the right to take them back. That is what this piece of legislation claims. So what does that mean? That obviously means that Alaska, according to Putin, is rightfully part of Russia. So be prepared, my friends. We can never relax with a violent psychopath near you. When somebody has a past of murder, of deceit, of theft, how can we treat them equally to others? No, my friends. We need to know what people have done in the past, and we need to judge them accordingly to their actions. That is the only way we can move forward. We cannot give equal rights to people who behave in such a way like the Russian terrorist regime does, who rape, murder, and destroy everything around them, who spread misinformation and attack the minds of vulnerable people, people with mental issues. They attack the minds of those people with these conspiracy mumbo-jumbo. That is what Russia does, my friends. And Russia will continue to do the same thing until they are stopped. This is not only the only piece of news that we have today, my friends. This is not the only piece of news. We have more. We have considerably more. The European Union has passed a legislation that condemns Orban for his actions against Ukraine. For any of you who might not be aware, Orban has vetoed every single piece or attempted piece of legislation to add Ukraine to the European Union. Because Orban, as we all well know, is Putin's shill. Orban is not only physically fat, but his pockets are fat with the Russian rubles. And we must not forget about that, my friends. We cannot have in our ranks people who hate us, who loathe us, who want to destroy us from within. We cannot have that. How can Orban, Putin's shill, be taking decisions in the European Union and be vetoing the many different legislations that the European Union wants to pass? No, my friends, we can't move on like this. Orban needs to be dealt with, and he is being dealt with right now. So for that, very good job to the EU and for this piece of legislation. Other than that, there's been protests in Russia. Now I know that sounds surprising because in Russia, any kind of protests are completely and utterly banned. You can't do anything in Russia, you can't protest. You can't even say that this war against the Ukrainian people is a war. You need to call it a special military operation. That's how they branded it in Russia, so that they can get away with the war crimes they've committed against the prisoners of war. Because for them, they don't count as prisoners of war. It's ingenious, really. It's like you change legislation in your country, that if you steal something, that's not theft, it's not prosecutable. And suddenly you go to other countries and you start stealing also. Oh, but in my country, it's not a crime. Well, my friends, that's not how it works. There are laws and they need to be obeyed. But sometimes, genocidal maniacs start dictating laws. And that is when we really have a problem. That is when things have to change. That's exactly what they have in Russia. This happy grandpa, as Prigozhin called him, this genocidal maniac, needs to be stopped. Stop Putin, stop the war.
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 Fighter jets for Ukraine.
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 Air defense 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 for Ukraine.
Coming back to the topic we were covering, the Bashkirs have been protesting against the Russian terrorist regime. And their wives and mothers have sent videos to their sons on the front line, telling them not to fight for the Russians. Because back home, the Russians are oppressing them. They're taking away what little liberties they had left. That is what's going on, my friends. And I think it's very good that finally the many ethnicities of Russia are waking up to the Russian imperialism, to the Russian genocide of the many different countries that could have been, but never were, because Russia never allowed them to be. Just like what they did to the Chechens. When they leveled Grozny to the ground, they would do it to any ethnicity, any minority in Russia. That is the country we're dealing with. And yet, some voices of appeasement claim that we can deal with Russia, that we can negotiate with Russia. Because it worked so well the other dozens of times that we've tried it before. It worked so well in the Budapest Memorandum, where Ukraine gave up the third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world in exchange of a peace agreement with Russia. It worked so well in the Ukraine and Russia Friendship Treaty, where Russia once again recognized Ukrainian borders pre-2014 and promised not to attack. It worked so well in both of the Minsk agreements, the first and the second, where Russia betrayed them a day after it was signed. Indeed, my friends, it worked so well with Prigozhin when he made a deal with Putin to be left alone, to go to Africa and practice his neo-colonialism in peace. But of course, Prigozhin had to recruit in Russia, because there were still a lot of skinheads and neo-Nazis in Russia ripe for their picking, to be sent to the battlefield and to defend the Russian interests all over the world. He was recruiting them in Russia, of course. And of course, as we all well know, he didn't recruit them for very long, because after a short amount of time, his plane was shot down by the Russian terrorist regime. Not because of the crimes that Prigozhin had committed, but because Prigozhin was getting too big for his own pants. He had ambitions. He wanted to be more, and Putin fears that. Putin feared the fact that Prigozhin was telling the truth about what Putin calls a special military operation. Prigozhin himself said that every single objective that Russia had claimed it had to achieve resulted in the exact opposite. Let's talk about the supposed demilitarization of Ukraine. Ukraine's army is more powerful than ever before. Let's talk about the supposed denazification of Ukraine. Prigozhin himself said that they've been fighting the Ukrainians for years, and they still couldn't find these imaginary neo-Nazis. Let's talk about the attacks against the Russian speakers. The Russian speakers who fought for Ukraine continue to fight for Ukraine, as the speakers of different languages in Russia get oppressed by the Russian terrorist regime, just like the Bashkirs, who we mentioned a while ago. And we hope that the many people of Russia, including the ethnic Russians themselves, decide that that's enough. The happy grandpa who's sending you as cannon fodder does not care about you, my friends. You, the people you used to call brothers and sisters, you who backstabbed us when we gave up the third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world. This message is for the Russians. You've been bamboozled, my friends. It's time to wake up. World, wake up!
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 More sanctions on Russia!
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 Seize Russian assets!
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 You know, I've had a very interesting and funny conversation with somebody who long ago I used to consider relatively a friend. Not very close, but not far away either. More than an acquaintance. He's not even an American, by the way, so it's not even his business. But he said that, oh, there's so many problems in America. Why should America send money to Ukraine? Why should they send aid to Ukraine? To which I replied, oh, hold on, before my reply, there's another point he made. He spoke about the homeless, of course. Because before this war, there were no homeless in America. They just appeared out of nothing, out of the ether, when the war began. And somehow he blames the Ukrainians for it. It's ingenious, really. Some of these individuals are truly astonishing in their mental gymnastics. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. But this individual was making this point, that they should help the homeless. To which I replied, yes, of course. The homeless will find a much bigger need for all the shells and ammo being sent to Ukraine. I mean, it's going to bring them out of the poverty, obviously. Did he reply to that? No. He didn't want to reply. It's funny, every single time one of the points of these Russophiles gets debunked, they just switch to another point. They don't admit defeat. They don't admit they were wrong. They act as if they were right all along. Sometimes they move the goalposts. Other times they completely shift the topic. So how can we discuss with these people, my friends? With a lot of difficulty, with a lot of patience, but we can. Most definitively we can. Because the truth is on our side. And we are willing and able to tell the whole world what really is going on in Ukraine and how we all can stop this war by helping Ukraine win. All together, we will win.
All together, we will win.
All together, we will win.
All together, we will win.
All together, we will win.
All together, we will win.
Stop Russia, stop the war.
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 Self-defense is not offense. Arm Ukraine.
Self-defense is not offense. Arm Ukraine!
Self-defense is not offense. Arm Ukraine!
Self-defense is not offense! Arm Ukraine!
Self-defense is not offense. Arm Ukraine!
Self-defense is not offense! Arm Ukraine!
There's a shift in mentality that needs to happen in the West. Because the people here have forgotten what it is to be at war, what it is to be attacked, what it is to have people come for your lives, people that cannot be negotiated with, people that cannot be bribed and cannot be treated with, people who only care for your destruction. Those are the people we have forgotten about, because we have not seen them in real life for so long. We've lived in peace for decades, for generations, and that was the price of that peace. The forgetfulness of somebody who does not know how precious peace is and how difficult it is to maintain sometimes, especially when you have a genocidal neighbor like Russia. But I digress. My friends, we have to remember that we need to unite behind this cause. There are people around this world who fight against terrorism, against terrorist countries like Russia, Iran, and North Korea, against terrorist organizations like ISIS, Hezbollah, Hamas, and many others. We must not forget about these people. Those people are the real heroes who fight against these terrorist regimes, against these terrorist organizations. And it is pointless to try to criticize them, to critique them and tell them they're not fighting them the right way. When you're in a fight and you punch harder than the other guy, what sense is there in people coming to you and criticizing you if the other guy started the fight? I mean, why did he start the fight in the first place? Very unfortunately, this problem stems to the right and to the left of the political spectrum. The right-wingers confuse short-term benefit and long-term benefit. In the short term, of course, helping Ukraine costs some money. But in the long term, it protects something that money sometimes can't even buy. It protects safety of the countries of the West. It protects freedom. It protects the interests. And it protects the influence of the free world in the rest of the planet. Those things do not come cheap, my friends. And the help that Ukraine has gotten, although we're very grateful for it lately, in fact, France has given Ukraine a lot of Scalp missiles. Thank you very much for that. And following the example of this great country of Great Britain, that has given Ukraine the Storm Shadow missiles, and everybody else was getting cold feet. Once again, when everybody was getting cold feet and was saying giving tanks was too much, the United Kingdom gave Ukraine the Challenger 2 tanks. For that, we say thank you. Because it's unbelievably important that everybody understands that this war is not local. This is a global war against the free world. And these terrorist regimes and countries that we have spoken about before, they will stop at nothing until they reach their goals or until they are stopped. The choice is ours, my friends, but we need to act soon. We cannot continue to imagine that this war is going to pass us and never touch us. That is our message, my friends. And of course, in terms of the left, on the other hand, the left-leaning people of the political spectrum, they have a different confusion in their heads. They oftentimes confuse being a victim and being a loser. Very oftentimes, they attack countries who win wars and who manage to get gains from those wars, although they did not start them. That is a folly that needs to be changed, my friends. And of course, the left-leaning parties all over the world, the communist parties, the socialist parties, and funnily enough also the far-right parties, they all support Russia because they are extremists and because Russia works in their favor. Because Russia, of course, is an extremist country with an extremist ideology that practices a modern-day witch hunt against the Ukrainian people. Of course, it's not just the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine they speak about. They also speak about the de-Satanization of Ukraine. Now think about that for a second. A country of the 21st century is blaming another country of being a Satanist country. And that is their excuse for attacking them. What kind of conspiratorial trash is that? Well, my friends, that is the world we live in. And as we all know very well, the only thing it takes for these conspiracies, for these evil individuals to win, is for good men and women to do nothing. That is why we are doing something. By being here and by continuing to spread the word about the fight of the Ukrainian people, a fight for freedom and a fight for a better future. Slava Ukraini! Slava nacії! Україна! 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 Героям України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Ворогам України тричі!
Смерть! Смерть! Смерть!
And now, my friends, we will have a short musical break.
Героям слава!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Нашим героям тричі! Слава! Слава! Слава!
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
І нашим героям тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
We gather here since 2014. Some people were saying that it's one of the longest war rallies or any kind of protest that ever been in this country. We wish it was the shortest one, but unfortunately we have what we have. But we are very grateful for those countries that support us and who now are forming. We are having a drone coalition, artillery coalition, air defense coalitions, and most of the Europe, every country except for Hungary, there's always one, supports Ukraine and its fights for freedom, because Ukraine never started any wars. Ukraine never attacked any country, and our war count before this invasion was 1, where it was 0, and now it's 1 just because we got attacked in the middle of the night by Russians. The same Russians that have been attacking their neighbors for more than last 3 decades, and they will attack anyone who is smaller than them and those who are outside NATO. This is their 2 criteria. Someone smaller than them, so they will never attack someone like China, and smaller than them and outside NATO. Smaller than them and outside NATO. This is why they attacked Georgia in 2008. This is why for them attacking Moldova in the 90s was an easy target. This is why they waged so many wars, and this is why in 5 countries in Africa they are now activating African Legion to replace Wagner, and we are starting to get African soldiers and Belarusian soldiers being captured by Ukrainian army. So when people say this war is a Ukrainian problem, this is a global problem. When Russia is bombing Ukrainian grain in Odessa last summer, and they do it constantly since last summer, and they destroy grain that was going to Africa and other nations. This is his way, Russian way, and Putin's way of blackmailing Europe, blackmailing Africa, because Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state!
Russia is a terrorist state.
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 Stop Putin, stop the war.
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 And with Medvedev this week and last week, Putin, both of them saying that none of the territories, Putin said none of the territories that they acquired, that they will let go. This is why they are trying to advance with between 600 and more than 1,000 plus casualties every single day by those who are being killed, and around 2,000 daily are being injured in Russian army. They are so desperate to grab as much land as possible before this conflict is frozen. For us, we don't want it to be frozen. This is very easy negotiation for us. Leave our land and leave us alone. There will be no such thing as USSR 2.0. We don't want to be, he can write as many essays as he can about the unity between our nations. Ukraine was oppressed during USSR, Latvia was oppressed during USSR, Lithuania, Estonia, and many other countries. This is why countries like Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia, the smallest countries in Europe, say, we will fix your tanks, Ukraine. We will help to rehabilitate the soldiers of Ukraine. We will give some of our defense budget to you. And we are not scared of Russia, but they do it for two reasons. One, because they feel safe, because they are part of NATO, and two, because they remember the history. No matter how many times Russia will rewrite their history books, people who suffered their oppression remember it. And guess what? Children of those people and those people who were born in USSR, they still remember. Lots of people who were born in the 80s and 70s, they still remember 91. In Lithuania, how many people got killed. In Georgia, how many people got killed. And all these little republics that they still occupy, that should be independent. And this is why you see people waking up right now, that Russia is the worst neighbor to have and the worst friend to have. And this is why Finland, since September or October last year, closed all borders crossings with Russia, because having Russia as a neighbor is the worst geographical punishment that any country can endure. Only railway crossing is open between Finland and Russia, because Russians are sending illegal immigrants from the very same countries like Syria that they help with Wagner mercenaries to create those refugees. So they aid conflicts, create victims, and then they send them to Finland, and Finland says this is a hybrid war. Language war in Baltic states, when they say, oh, Russians are being oppressed because they don't know the language. They've been living there since 91, many even before that, since the 80s, but they can't speak any Latvian. Guess why? Because they get pensions and subsidies from Russian government, and they say don't leave this country, but don't integrate. Even my own brother, we had in the beginning of 2000s when they were closing Russian schools, and there was exactly the same language reform as in Ukraine that happened a decade later. The Russians gave out t-shirts saying hands off our Russian schools. Well, Latvia would not need those Russian schools if so many Russians didn't come there. And what does Russia does in occupied regions? In Donetsk and Lugansk regions, they bring Russian teachers, they bring Russian builders and Russian people, they promise them jobs, and they promise them good future, and they promise them better life. Guess who did that in 1944? Stalin did the same thing in Lviv.
150,000 Polish people were evicted and sent back to Poland. 250,000 Russians came, and they call it Ukrainization of Ukraine. So as you can see, no matter how much time passes by, Russia stays the same. They do exactly the same things because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 No trade with Russia.
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 More sanctions on 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 Russia.
And those sanctions are working. Billions and billions of dollars that tap of all the resources that they either cultivate on their own land or in Africa that they steal by Wagner mercenaries' help. More than $10 billion that come annually from African nations because Wagner, that is, Putin said, fully funded by Russian government. He said it last summer. And basically he admitted that every single war crime that Russia had committed through Wagner or any other mercenaries that connected to Wagner, and now with the African Legion that's gonna go full active this summer, all those war crimes are connected to Russian government. And this is why you will hear us say tribunal for Russian war criminals.
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 And the only reason why Hague had issued warrant for Putin's arrest because he had admitted that he kidnapped more than 20,000 children from occupied regions. This is a war crime, and this is why there's a warrant for his arrest. When he says he sponsors Wagner, this is the only evidence. I think it's the first time in history of humanity when a dictator is giving evidence against himself before he appears in court. This is the first time when the war criminal is not afraid to say, yes, I kidnap children, yes, I illegally misplace hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, yes, I commit war crimes, yes, my government pays for mercenaries in Africa, in Niger, and Burkina Faso, and Mali, and other countries, yes, this is all us. And guess what? When anyone says you can negotiate with him, and his own, I don't know what position Medvedev has now, it's something to do with defense department, but he used to be a president of Russia, but he's still in the government, and he said, a few days ago, he said that it's unacceptable Ukraine as it is in any shape or form, doesn't matter who will be president, doesn't matter who will be the government body in Ukraine, it's not acceptable for us, and this war will restart, it does not matter. So how can you negotiate when someone close to defense ministry and Putin himself says, we will not give any back the land? Guess what? In the beginning of the 90s, USSR thought the same thing. We will not give back the land to the people who lived there before we occupied them. Same thing was in Poland during the World War II when they occupied half of the Poland, and now Putin says that if need be, he personally will remind Polish people that the western part of Poland was gifted to them by Stalin. Well, it was stolen by Stalin in the first place. This is what we are dealing with. Nothing but terrorists that come to kill, steal, rape, and destroy. kill, steal, rape and destroy. This is the legacy of Russia. What is the legacy of Ukraine? Well, just put in any search engine the breadbasket of Europe and just read what Ukraine is about. It's a peaceful nation that never attacked anyone. But we are dealing with someone who is much bigger than us, much stronger than us. But the only disadvantage that they will always have against Ukraine, Ukraine has something to fight for: freedom and peace. Freedom and peace. What are they fighting for? A piece of land, a fridge from some old lady in Ukraine, an iPad that they can't unlock or use. They say, Putin said the other day, this year he said, they have gender-neutral toilets. Oh my goodness. Well, I grew up in a 2-bedroom flat, and I had my mom, my 2 brothers, and my dad. Well, I used gender-neutral toilet all my life. I think all of you don't have a men's and female toilet in your house. Well, for Putin that's a big problem, and he says many people are returning back to Russia. They can't handle the gender-neutral toilets. Well, I have news for you. You can have a look online. Around 40% of Russians don't have sewage. So I don't think a gender-neutral toilet is a big problem for Russians. They are freezing. Hundreds of thousands of Russians are freezing this winter. Yet they promised last year and the year before that Europe will freeze without Russian natural resources. It's very ironic when you see the news 50 kilometers from Moscow, people are saying it's frozen. The corridor outside their flat is absolutely frozen, and the lollipops, it looked like a Disney cartoon, but it's a nightmare. And they say, we have bonfires outside to warm up. So this is the Russian world that is trying to absorb Ukraine. This is our nightmare. The forced passports on us. Ukrainians are being forced on occupied regions to fight against Ukrainians for this new piece of Russian land, so they claim. And this is why all we want is that air defense that we need. And all we want is the tools that require to defend ourselves against an oppressor who's been oppressor for so long. In USSR and before that, anyone, all my grandparents, any Ukrainian that comes to this rally, ask them what their grandparents told them and what their grandparents told them. There's no such thing as unity between Ukraine and Russia. There were oppressors and there were victims. But we are victims no more. We are a free nation. This is our flag. We have our own language, our own culture, and we have our own path. We want to be part of European Union. We are the biggest, geographically, we are the biggest European country. We want to be part of NATO, and guess what? NATO wants to have Ukraine and European Union, everyone except for Hungary. There's always one Orban in a family. So it's fine, we can live with Hungary's delusions and we will fight Russian delusions, but still, we want you to know that we need that air defense. Around 30% in one day of all the suicide drones can go through, and they cause so much damage. Because Russia is targeting city centers. If it's a big city in Ukraine, they will hit it in the middle, they will try to hit power stations, and from 33 drones the other day, 22 got shot down. Those who didn't got shot down caused a lot of damage and a lot of casualties in civilians. Only in civilians. We target their Black Sea fleet, they target our hotels, schools and hospitals for only one reason. Because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 Air defense for Ukraine.
Air defense for
Air defense for Ukraine.
Air defense for Ukraine.
Air defense for Ukraine.
Air defense for Ukraine.
F-16s for Ukraine.
F-16s for Ukraine.
F-16s for Ukraine.
F-16s for Ukraine.
And we need that only for one reason and one reason only. Because self-defense is no offense. Arm Ukraine.
Self-defense is not offense. Arm Ukraine.
Self-defense is no offense. Arm Ukraine.
Self-defense is not offense. Arm Ukraine.
Tribunal for Russian war criminals.
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 And we are facing criminals. Most of them we killed, about 45,000 of Wagner mercenaries that came to us in 2022. They got killed in a battlefield, but guess what? Those around more than 5,000 that returned back to Russia have a clean slate. Many went to work in the police, many started working in schools. So you have killers and rapists with a clean slate. That can only happen in Russia. What other things can happen in Russia is rewriting constitution, and they need armed police only for civilians, unarmed civilians. If you are an old lady and you say no to war and you come out and you are too loud for them, and what you say it doesn't go what with the government TV stations are saying, what's gonna happen? They're gonna arrest, they're gonna send an armed police just to arrest an old lady. The other day, last year, there was an incident that one little girl in school, she was around 8 or 9 years old, she wrote no to war, so her father got arrested because her little daughter said no to war. What war? Well, maybe they were studying World War II in school. Who cares? She said no to war. That means that her father is an extremist just because his little daughter said no to war. There was no to war on one bookshop in St. Petersburg. The windows of that bookshop got broken numerous times because apparently that offends people, that people don't want war. So how can Ukrainians negotiate with a nation who still think they are living in USSR, and when Ukrainian government says, you know what, we're going to put trident on our mother Ukraine statue in Kiev, what do? They say, we are offended because they are destroying part of our identity. In 2023, Russians are identifying with hammer and sickle from USSR era. They identify as USSRians. So we identify as Ukrainians now, we identified as Ukrainians 100 years ago and 90 years ago during Holodomor, when they took all our crops and they said, oh, there was no crops. Well, our grandparents and our great-grandparents say there was crops and we were collecting it daily. Yet we were starving daily as well, because this is what Russians did. They did it in 32 and 33, 90 years ago, and guess what? They are doing it right now. They in 2022 in winter they tried to freeze us, and they said, why do they still have lights? Well, they have lights because we have volunteers, and we used to send generators, power banks. I sent lots of solar powered lights for my friends, and then I was just giving it to random people who live in Ukraine, neighbors of my friends and family, and we kept those lights. Because for every evil that Russia does, we have volunteers who try to undo it. When they bomb Novokakhovka Dam, and it's the biggest ecocide in Europe for I don't know how many decades, we send water purification tablets. When they bomb power stations, we chip in and we buy generators. Support Ukraine London has gathered more than 700,000 pounds since the beginning of invasion. We have packed more than 30,000 first medical aid kits. What does Russia do at the same time? Well, guess what? They are spending 10 times more on war in Ukraine than they spend on their own health care. So this is why it will answer your questions if you ever ask yourself, why does Russians refuse to have a prison exchange with Ukrainians? We are so desperate to get our soldiers back, to get our civilians back, to get every single child that they have kidnapped from occupied regions back. But for Russians, they don't care about the living, they don't care about the dead. They are not even collecting their own soldiers when they die. There's nothing to identify. On many occasions I saw articles that different people, bodies got sent to the families and they say, we will pay you, just bury whoever we send you. This is how Russia is treating Russian people. And this is how they treat Ukrainians that they occupy regions in those occupied regions. And this is our nightmare, because we are dealing with nothing but terrorists and scumbags. Because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 Tribunal for Russian war criminals.
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 And this is what Ukraine is dealing with. And while Ukraine is fighting the second, so they claim, biggest army, 20% of Russian's fleet is fleet no more. It will be a base for new coral reefs, and the scrap metal that they created, one day it might be sold, it might stay there, but their biggest flagships, their biggest radio planes like A-50, everything becomes scrap metal when it attacks Ukraine. Everything that we can shoot down, if we can't get some ammunition, we adopt old rockets, and this is how that warship Moscow got sank down. That's how most of their fleet is leaving Black Sea, and Black Sea is Russia free. Black Sea is Russia free, but wait a second, but Ukraine doesn't have a big navy. Well, we have something better than a navy. We have a desire to stay free, and we have desire to have peace on our land. Like my cousin on the front line who's waiting for his weapon and writing a report every single day, Sergey, the father of two, a little boy and a girl, he went and he said, I will go, I will not run away. What do Russians do? They run away to Georgia, the same Georgia they attacked in 2008. They were hiding there from 2022. From September until today. They are hiding from their own government. We are hiding from their bombs. They are hiding from their politicians. This is two different perspectives that Ukrainians and Russians are facing every morning. When a Russian wakes up, he says to himself, I hope they're not gonna mobilize me. I hope we're not going to invade another country, but for every single Ukrainian, for 40 million people, since 24th of February 2022, there's no such thing as planning future. There's no such thing as planning education. There's no such thing as a normal life. No child in the world, doesn't matter if it's a Ukrainian child or any other child, should ever get used to air raid sirens, should not be able to know where the bunker for safety is. In schools, they play this game in Ukraine. They started this game in 2022. Who will first run to the bomb shelter? Have you ever played that game?